Hey y'all. It's been a minute. My ADHD has been kicking my behind. I have felt all over the place, and I've realized I haven't even properly introduced myself to y'all, and here I am telling my medical history. So, my name is Quasia, and welcome to my channel. To be honest, am fairly new to this video making game.
It's only my third day out here. I don't know.
And I feel like I've kind of tried to make content in some sort of way for years now. Back in college, I would record video messages or voice notes on my phone, and this was right before the podcast business started to boom and everybody started doing podcasts. I was getting into them and I was like, oh, I kind of want to do this. So I would just voice record my daily thoughts or things that I was experiencing in college. And eventually I wanted to create a podcast with it. Now, ever since then, I've been featured on podcasts. I have told other people to start podcasts, but not started my own. And I've tried multiple times, but just never followed through with it. And then the beef of 2024 happened, and Kendrick is probably my favorite artist. So I was geeked up around this time. One, this has been the most that we've heard from Kendrick back to back to back in a long time, especially after his long break before Mr. Morale. So I was just in shock and awe every time we got to hear from him. And then on top of that, just the material that we got from that era, A1. And as a Kendrick fan, there's always so much more to learn about than what's on the surface in the songs. So my neurodivergent brain was being fed. The dopamine hits were high, and I was fully engaged in putting everything together, learning about everything, all of that. So I was locked in, and I started recording TikTok videos because my mom's close friend was curious about kind of what was going on. She wanted to know more about the history of it all and how it got to that point. And at the same time, I was trying to overcome my fear of being seen and perceived. I felt like that fear was kind of holding me back from a lot of things. Like I said, have always tried to keep my voice out there because I feel like I have sometimes a different perspective and am able to connect things a little bit differently. But this fear of being perceived has always stopped me from taking my creative ideas in my head and putting them into reality. And so I kind of wanted to do us both a favor by recording videos of kind of the timeline of how we got here, explaining all of that, breaking down the lyrics of the songs, putting my opinions and my thoughts, and also just posting them so that I could get used to having my voice out there and people perceiving me. By doing that, I gained a beautiful small little community over on TikTok, and it's really what has kept me going. I had people, even if it was just one or two people, telling me to keep posting, that they really enjoyed my content. That really kept me going, even when there was times where I felt like my voice was kind of an echo chamber. I was double guessing. I was second guessing on whether or not I had anything fresh or new to add to the conversation. And people would just tell me please continue posting these, you have a different perspective, or I never thought of it that way. So yeah, that's why I kind of moved over here on top of the TikTok ban happening. I, to be honest, didn't feel comfortable moving over to Instagram. I'm not really social media savvy, I guess you could say, and I'm working on that. But I just felt like with Instagram, you have to, post a certain number of reels a day, or post a set number of posts. You need to post at this time. You need to post at that time. That was too much for me. I wanted my audience to reach me in an organic way, in an authentic way. And Instagram just, I don't feel comfortable over there doing all that. So I decided to come back to YouTube, and I felt like, maybe this was my time to come back here and test it out. So here I am. I'm not really going to go too much more into detail. You'll learn more about me as the videos go on, but I want to get into the topic for today because we got a lot to discuss. So let's get into it. In this video, I want to explore the ways in which Kendrick and Beyonce have teamed up to kind of show us how we can win or kind of get through this great American game, and how we can reconstruct America to come out on the other end as a better community and country for everybody. I feel like 2024 was kind of our warning year. In the beginning, we started it off with a bang with Cat Williams' interview on the Shannon Sharpe Show, in which he kind of warns us of the downfall of Hollywood. He kind of starts to expose some things, and after that, we see month after month after month more stuff coming out about Hollywood and kind of what goes on behind the scenes. And ultimately, with the fall of Hollywood, we kind of get the mask of the fall, the mask of the fall, the fall of the mask of America and this American dream. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps. We start paying a little bit more attention again to the predatory behaviors of Hollywood, of the industry, and ultimately of companies outside of, entertainment as well. But specifically sticking to the entertainment industry for the purpose of this video, that idea of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps doesn't really mean anything anymore. We kind of see that sometimes people make decisions that are immoral or harmful in order to be where they are. And although some people knew about and had been talking about the predatory behaviors of the industry and of people like Diddy, it wasn't until the Diddy raids that happened where more people started paying attention, more people started speaking out and actually believing victims. And it kind of created a lot of stuff. And then, of course, even before the Diddy raids, we get the iconic and historic dropping of Cowboy Carter, and of course, the beef of 2024. So why was it so important that all of those things happened in 2024? Why, how do they connect? We're going to explore that and see how the works of Kendrick and Beyonce, specifically within the last few years, tied together to show us how we can move forward. In 2023, we know that Beyonce was touring with Renaissance, or doing the Renaissance tour, which in itself was such an iconic moment. Like, how did she get cities battling each other on who could stay mute the longest? Look around and spin my without even coming out and specifically saying, hey, during this, time on the tour, I want y'all to go mute. No, it just happened to come about. And on top of that, you got all the moments of people kind of picking out their outfits for the tour and all the memes. You ain't no diva. She ain't no diva. I'm so grateful for that meme. And all of that came out of the Renaissance tour. But let me get the date right, May 19th specifically, during the tour, Beyonce drops the remix of America Has a Problem, which is a song on the Renaissance album. And it's featuring the one and only Kendrick Lamar. Now, I initially broke down the lyrics line by line. Let me tell y'all, I have tried to record this video 50 million times. I'm a Virgo, so I am a perfectionist at heart, and I am working on not, you know, like allowing myself to not be perfect. But, anyways, I ended up just wanting to kind of sum up Kendrick's lyrics because for the sake of time, and I just feel like it would just be easier to follow along. So I'm going to look at my notes so I don't miss anything. Basically, he talks about a lot of flashy things in the beginning, showing his wealth and what his work has gotten him. He then goes on to call out being a Gemini and how that has him feeling a little out of his noodle, giving us some foreshadowing on what's to come. He mentions how he can't be cloned and that no AI could ever learn his complexities, which again, foreshadowing on what was to come. He directly calls out the industry by name and America, referencing the violence that it has done physically to the culture, but also metaphorically in the messages that they have tried to push through the music, through the entertainment, and who they allow to be the face of the industry and what we consume. He throws some subliminals at Drake, of course, and states how he's failed to mention how ready he is to go into this battle with Drake and kind of be a little bit more pointed rather than subliminal with it. And Beyonce is part of the song. She speaks as if she's talking about a male figure or talking to a male figure. I think this male figure is the industry. I think that she's telling them, like, I'm going to do what I want to do. I have worked so hard and played by your rules for this long to get to where I am. I'm done playing by the rules. And, at the end of the day, Beyonce brings attention to the industry. Whether it's people criticizing her or just wanting to see what she does next, anytime Beyonce does something, there's gonna be conversation around it. There's gonna be attention on it. And so, you can't fake that influence. The industry needs her. The industry needs people like Kendrick as well. And so you would go on to see that being showed or presented in Cowboy Carter because, it was an album that I'm sure her team or people in the industry would tell her she couldn't do or shouldn't do. It was an album that didn't abide by the rules of the country genre. And there was other things that she would go on to do that, went against these quote unquote rules of the game. And so basically, them kind of teaming up on this song showed us, the industry and America, like, hey, we're ready to play this game. As I've been working on this video and research on everything in the video, I noticed that there was kind of 3 pillars that I believe are things that we need to focus on as a community in order to make it out of this era, to survive and to thrive as a community. And also 3 pillars that I believe Kendrick and Beyonce have also tried to convey throughout their work, and that is education, community, and love. Now, I want to focus first on the education aspect. But before we get into Cowboy Carter and the dropping of Cowboy Carter, I wanted to take a look at the Harper's Bazaar interview that Beyonce did in 2021, because it's very similar to the Harper's Bazaar interview that Kendrick did recently before dropping GNX. In the interview, she talks about kind of her journey to get to where she is now. We get a little bit more insight into Beyonce's mind and, again, how she landed on Cowboy Carter, how she got to the point where she is now. I do want to give a shout out to Caitlin Greenidge, which is the person who interviewed her in this interview. In the beginning of the interview, she mentions that she's working on new music, and she says, quote unquote, promises to obliterate old boundaries, which Cowboy Carter would end up doing. She then takes us through her early life. She talks about how she used to be more quiet, and that allowed her, like her being quiet, kind of observing, allowed her to have a bit more empathy. And then she kind of goes into her process of how she has evolved into the more vocal Beyonce that she is now. Notably, she speaks on breaking generational curses, which Kendrick had also just dropped a whole album around with Mr. Morale. She talks about her boundaries with social media and how easy it is to get wrapped up in the industry, to get sucked in, and making sure that she has those boundaries and is still living in her real life, which again Kendrick speaks on in Mr. Morale. In the interview, she also talks about why she started Parkwood Entertainment, which is kind of her creative media business. One, she wanted to get into her business bag and kind of venture out. But two, she talks about how whenever she would go to make, a creative project, she had to reach out to multiple different companies or vendors to get everything that she needed. And that was kind of like bothering her. So she wanted to have just one production company or business that would have everything that she would need, from lighting to dancers to outfits to whatever it is that you would need to make a project come to life. So she started one herself with Parkwood Entertainment that was Black owned, women owned, and had everything that she needed. This is also similar to Kendrick with PG Lang, which is also a very similar type of business venture that helps people with creative projects that they're working on. That's the business that Kendrick started with Day Free. So a lot of similarities there. And then the pictures and the outfits that she's wearing in the interview are also intentional. All of them are part of the Ivy Park drop that she had around that time, and Ivy Park is her clothing line that she does with, I think it's Adidas that they are partnered with. But the drop was inspired, she said, around her hometown, which is Houston, and American history, and specifically the Black Cowboys. And I'm not from Houston, but my family is, so I visit Houston a lot. I've been to the rodeos there, and just like I have a kind of insight on what the culture is like out there, and it is very different than maybe someone who lives on the east side or even in Arizona where I live. I wanted to include some history around the Black Cowboys because obviously this section is the education section, and I feel like the purpose of her including these little tidbits is for us to then take that, do research, and learn a little bit more about the roots and the origins. So according to the Smithsonian Magazine and the Library of Congress, slaves were first used to maintain the cows on the farms in Texas specifically, while the white people went to fight in the Civil War. During this time, the slaves developed skills of cattle tending, and those skills would then be needed when the ranchers came back from the war and needed help kind of getting the cattle under control. Therefore, being a cowboy was one of the first and few jobs that Black Americans could have post-Civil War. Due to the harsh treatment that they would receive as they traveled through different towns, they kind of created this strong community of, Black cowboys. Then, after their work was not really needed anymore, they still had all these talents that they had learned and developed through their work. They took those to what we now know as rodeos. I believe before they were called rodeos, it was called the Chitlin Circuit, which was a big also promotional thing that Beyonce used in the rollout for Cowboy Carter. And I think the tour is called the Chitlin Circuit, correct me if I'm wrong. But I believe, all of that is encompassed in the history of where she came from. All that history has deep roots in Houston. I also wanted to point out that the first cowboys in America were the Spanish vaqueros, which also has significance. As we can see, Beyonce, has some of that influence in not only the visuals, but in the music as well, in her rollout. And I believe that it's going to have a little bit more influence in Act 3. I feel that Act 3 is going to be some sort of rock / Spanish influence sort of album, but also connects with Kendrick's Spanish influence on GNX. The Black Cowboy Parade is also a popular event in Oakland, California, which it's not LA, but it is California where Kendrick is from, for the last 74 years, which is, again, another connection to Kendrick, as he wore a lot of the Compton Cowboy brand when he was rolling out, or before Mr. Morale and during that era, but also now he still kind of incorporates that style and that brand in some of his outfits during the GNX era. And lastly, she talks about how she has been a rule follower for so long, and now that she's in her 40s, she's ready to break the rules and go against what is expected of her, which leads us to the Cowboy Carter drop. March 29th, 2024, Beyonce drops Cowboy Carter. Now, Cowboy Carter is a country album, or as Beyonce likes to call it, a Beyonce album with country tones. The album features up-and-coming Black country artists, some of the artists who are considered OGs in the genre, and Post Malone and Miley Cyrus, which are two artists who kind of used the hip-hop culture to either gain clout within the industry or to kind of come up, and then eventually, when they got to where they needed to be, went back to their roots of country, which is kind of showing, her kind of utilizing those three categories of artists kind of shows the main purpose of Cowboy Carter. One, showing love to her hometown and making a statement that no matter what they try and tell her, she's always going to be country. That's literally where she's from. Two, to educate us on the history of country and how it all started with Black musicians and how it has been colonized by white musicians and the industry. And three, call out the industry and how versatile, and show them how versatile she really is. We see this play out, with the album, as she starts with American Requiem, which is her telling us it's time for a new America. It's time for us to take a look around at where we are and where we want to go. In Yaya, we get her pointing out the history of this country as, there's a whole lot of red in that white and blue. There's a whole lot of violence that has happened to our ancestors who built this country and, continues to happen to our community. She speaks on not being able to erase our history, as this album had fans like me going to research to learn about the different references she was making and, Easter eggs that she was placing in the visuals, the lyrics, the rollout. And that's especially important right now, as we've seen most recently our history literally being taken down from the archives, them trying to put in all these laws to not teach about the history of this country. So by her kind of including these little references as best as she could, we are able to learn more. And through us learning more, although you can try and take it down, we're going to remember that, and we're going to be able to then pass on that history, which I think is important, which is why I wanted to include as much as I could in regards to timing and everything in this video, just at least to get people's minds thinking and to put it out there so that you can then go on and do your own research as well. And then Spaghetti gave us the energy that she was coming in with, the fiery, ready for war, I'm coming for what I deserve energy. And, this album was a response to her being told that she had no place or right to perform a country song she had wrote a few years back at the CMAs. She had performed it there, and during the performance, she was getting booed. They were telling her, you don't have no right to be here, you're not country enough, and calling her all sorts of names. And so, she came back with this album showing them, like, I've been country. It's literally where I'm from. And also to remind us of our roots. Again, bringing that to the forefront, bringing that to our attention, which is also what Kendrick does in GNX. Again, originally I had broken down a bunch of the songs in there and had a little bit more to say about each one, but I think that I'm gonna save that for a Cowboy Carter breakdown video in itself, because it just would take way too long to include in here. And again, I don't want the main issues and topics to be lost in this video because I can get carried away. I was getting carried away as I was researching because I'm making all these different connections and like trying to include them in the video, which is a little bit too much. But that's kind of the general idea of Cowboy Carter and the essence of the album in itself. October 21st, 2024, we would get an interview from Kendrick and SZA with Harper's Bazaar. Now, just like Beyonce did in her Harper's Bazaar interview, Kendrick also gives us multiple Easter eggs on what we would go on to get. First, Kendrick opens the interview by kind of explaining why he chose SZA to interview him. He says that he's able to kind of process things a little bit better through deeper connections, and obviously him and SZA have known each other for years, and so that connection is there. But it would also be our first Easter egg at SZA being on the album, SZA being on the tour, and performing with him at the Super Bowl, which is so crazy. The year that both of them have had. I'm also a really big SZA fan. I first started listening to her when she dropped Z, and have been able to go to each tour, the Control Tour, the SOS Tour, and then now the Grand National Tour. And it's just so crazy to see her go from small venues to a stadium. But let's get back to Kendrick, as he, of course, is the topic of discussion. In this interview, Kendrick talks about his journey in dealing with being in the spotlight. He talks about how he's able to kind of step outside of himself, outside of his body, and observe himself, and then kind of go from there and, move things around if he needs to, fix things that he's not really liking the way things are going. And I think it's kind of important that he's able to do that, because it's kind of like his way of self-reflecting. You're able to step outside of yourself in your day-to-day and observe behaviors, actions, things like that, in order to grow and change. He talks about his spiritual journey, which has always fascinated me, because I believe that Kendrick has some sort of special spiritual gift, that he's able to connect with the spiritual world. I know that sounds so crazy, but I do believe that. So it's always really interesting to me to hear him talk about that, his experiences with connecting with that, and kind of just, I don't know, sometimes he does things and says things that are very prophetic, and it just fascinates me. He talks about the power of vulnerability, the power of integrity as a whole, and how he's focused on really staying present, the practice of staying present. And I think those are really three themes that he kind of took with him throughout this whole new, I wouldn't say new, but another era of Kendrick, which I like to call the Boogeyman era. He's kind of really pushed that, which I think is really important. My favorite part of the interview is when he talks about being able to tap into both his masculine and feminine side, and how being vulnerable has kind of been his superpower. I think it's so important that a male figure in rap that's as big as Kendrick talks about those things, especially at the time that he did, because all eyes were on him. People who maybe wouldn't have normally gone to read this interview were going to read the interview. And with the way that toxic masculinity has been pushed on us, Men aren't allowed to be vulnerable without being labeled as something that seems derogatory. It's like men aren't able to express their emotions. They don't even know how to sometimes. And it's really dangerous. As humans, we have emotions and we function the same way, essentially. It's just that society has put these ideas of how a man should act or how a woman should act. And it just doesn't work like that. All of us have masculine and feminine characteristics in us. So it's just how you balance it out. It's just how you tap into each one of them. And they're both important to be a whole human being. So I just think it's really cool that he talked about that. Like I said, especially at the time that he was, when there were so many eyes on him. But not only in the messaging throughout the interview, are like, the Easter eggs that we get, but also in the pictures, just like Beyonce, and the outfits that he chose to wear. We get a lot of history with both of those. He is kind of posing with a black GNX in almost every picture. If not, they have like the tires, which is so crazy again that I recognized it and I knew that there was some sort of history behind it, and I thought maybe that was just why he included it in there. But then literally it would go on to be this whole new like era. It would be the album, it would be all of it. One of the designers that Kendrick is wearing in this interview is Willie Chavarria. I believe that's how you say his name. But he is a Mexican American designer from LA, so even that in itself has some significance. But in this article and in a recent fashion show, Willie kind of recreated his version of a zoot suit. And the zoot suit has deep history. It is a suit that has kind of wide shoulder pads with like balloon-like pants. And as Harold Fox said, it came right off the streets and out of the ghetto, which is kind of the same way that Kendrick, like the same story of Kendrick. He started his rap career in the streets of Compton and was able to make it out. The roots came from American. The roots came from African American drape suits, which were popular in the 30s in Harlem, and people would wear them in like dance halls. And they were also influenced by jazz music, which Kendrick has said multiple times he has been influenced by, and has a whole album that's infused with it. So again, just bringing together all of this history for us simply by choosing intentionally who he's working with and what he's wearing. The zoot suit then made its way to LA and kind of cemented itself amongst the Mexican American and Filipino Americans, and it was kind of became a statement of pride and youth in the community. But these suits eventually led to many in the Hispanic American and Filipino American communities to being lynched, terrorized, beaten, as there were a lot of racial tensions rising. Just is very similar to the Rodney King riots in LA. Around World War II, there was a lot of Black, white, and Hispanic servicemen who came to LA, and this caused a lot of racial tensions between the white migrants and the Mexican Americans, who had already created like this strong sense of community in LA. And so it caused, Mexican men and women to kind of come together as a community to protect each other, which then came to be known as like a gang type of situation, which is very similar to the Black American community. As, again, around the Rodney King riots in the crack era, we had to come together as a community to protect each other. And many called us gangs, which then led to obviously something else, but that is where the original intention behind it was, to protect each other, men and women in the community. So that is where this, I think it's called Pachuco style, came from. Now the Pachuco style transformed from the zoot suits to what we now call like the cholo style, which is, you'll often see like the Dickies khakis, the flannels that are buttoned all the way to the top, the bandanas either around the neck or the head, and the high socks with the Cortez, which Kendrick did come out with his own line. He did like a collab with Nike. This was back in like 2017, I believe. I was able to actually go to the event where they dropped at, and he did an interview, and I was able to obviously watch him. He kind of talked about his creative process through coming up with the design for the shoe and kind of his inspiration behind it. And he talks a lot about just like the culture and where the high socks with the shoes came from. And even I think on the inside of the shoe it has like a saying that says like wear with high socks or something like that. So I just think it's really cool how even in the clothing he's incorporating, you know, his culture, where he came from, which again is highly intertwined with the Mexican American culture, as those communities were very prevalent in the area he's from. As you can see, Kendrick's use of his style and designer in this article provides us with so much information in itself, and it connects back to his roots as Black Americans, specifically in LA, experienced the same things that, again, Mexican Americans were experiencing in regards to the Zoot suit. And, you know, obviously still to this day, both communities are experiencing the same types of violence. Also, side note, I did recently watch the TV show Them, and I knew obviously about the Great Migration and people moving over, Black people specifically moving over to the West Side and like the North and everything, but there was a lot of stuff that I didn't really know about. So I'm gonna have to do a little bit more research into it, and I do want to do like a video on that TV show because there was just so much in there that I was catching on to, and it was really interesting actually. I initially didn't want to watch it because I don't know, it just seemed kind of, I don't like watching a lot of like trauma type of movies, or shows, but I do think this one was like important to see and watch. So if you do have Amazon Prime, I think it's on there. Watch the TV show Them. But anyways, it just kind of reminded me of that. But, you know, although it also gave us information on the backgrounds of the GNX and the clothing, the Zoot suit, things like that, it was also another Easter egg at the title of his album, and again him featuring kind of like what the vibe of the album would be. Then of course in almost every photo we see Kendrick posed next to a GNX, which is a Buick Grand National. I do have some notes here, so I'm just might look at them so I don't miss anything. But from what I was researching on it, it's a very rare vehicle. It was produced in 1987, which is also the same year that Kendrick was born, and it only came out in that black colorway. As Motor Trend describes it, it is a fast and fun to drive vehicle. I'm not really into cars, so I didn't include all the like 1P whatever. But if you want to geek out about it in the comments, please do so I can learn more. Kendrick would also go on to explain in this article, or I think it was actually subsequent interviews that he did like around the Super Bowl, and also in the GNX album, he talks about how all he wanted growing up was to be able to buy a Grand National. So it's kind of also him showing how his work has led him to be as successful as he is in order to be able to purchase a rare vehicle like that. And that vehicle also kind of gained like this symbol of respect, especially where he was from. But you know, obviously if you have this very rare vehicle, whether you got it when it first came out or were able to purchase it years later, like it's a symbol of a sign of respect and kind of like honor. November 22nd, 2020, what is this, 2024, yeah, 2024, we get the snippet on YouTube.
Only thing better right now is living right now, and I can't spare no feelings. Quiet on set, but my aura loud. I navigate through hood shit and wisdom. The money out here, young man, fuck Cody on here, you'll die broke trying to play victim.
Of Kendrick with this GNX. And then a few minutes later, of course, we would get the drop of GNX. Now, obviously, this was a surprise drop, and none of us knew this was going to happen. I am going to do a whole breakdown series as I've been doing with his other albums. So I will save how I found out, what I was doing, all of that for that series. But even talking about it now, like my heart starts to race because it was just such a crazy day. I still can't believe we got that. But on the album, Kendrick features a lot of up and coming LA artists or rappers: AZ Chike, Dodie Six, Young Threat, Hida J3, and has a lot of Hispanic influence. You know, the opening being the voice of Deda Barrera, who is a mariachi singer, and her voice kind of carries us throughout the album, which gives it this very like Western mob movie type of feel. I feel like when I'm listening to it, there's a lot of the smooth soul samples, like from SWV and Luther Vandross, which soul hip hop in itself got its roots from like jazz, soul, like all of those genres is kind of what helped hip hop get to where it is. Back in the day, rappers were pulling samples like that, and DJs were remixing it and making these beats from it. And so he kind of brings us back to that original style and way of hip hop, which is the genre that he fell in love with. Also includes Hispanic rappers as well, Peso and Lefty Gunplay. So again, he's kind of showing us the unison between the culture and the community on the West Coast, and how both cultures have kind of impacted him and been around him, all his life. Similar to Beyonce, Kendrick also uses channeling to kind of pay homage to the OGs of the genre, or artists that he's looked up to, like Tupac and Nas. And then on Reincarnated specifically, he talks about some of the pioneers in music, and most people believe one to be Billie Holiday, which is was a major performer on the Chitlin circuit, which I initially misspoke on the last part. It was a kind of group of places that black artists specifically, could go to be able to perform, because around that time there's a lot of racial tensions and they couldn't just go anywhere. So she was a big major performer in those performances. Again, I'm gonna do a little bit more of a deep dive into that album, but that'll be for that series. But GNX kind of functions in the same way that Cowboy Carter does, as it is a love letter to LA. It is a love letter to the craft that got Kendrick to where he is and probably saved his life. And it not only showcases like the work that he has put in to get to this point and the talent that he has, but it also puts on younger artists, or artists who are maybe not as well known. It puts them on and out into the world, and those artists who specifically still care about the craft in itself and the integrity of the genre, the same way that Cowboy Carter kind of does. So with the dropping of Cowboy Carter and GNX, both Kendrick and Beyonce are able to provide so much history just within the little intentional things that they did, whether it was visuals that they were rolling out, interviews that they were doing, down to the clothing that they were wearing, even obviously the lyrics and the music. All of that allowed us to learn more about our history. Now, some people may have already known about a lot of these things, but I'm sure there's a lot of people who did not know about the history of most of the things that we've covered so far. And there's still so much else that I didn't cover, just for the sake of time, that you can learn just by them simply being intentional about what they put out, and just sharing the love for their craft and for the genre that they have grown up with, whether it's country and R&B, or soul and hip hop. So I think, they all connect in some way, and it's very relevant that they both dropped around the same time within the same year. Um, which brings me to part two of the game, planting the seeds and establishing that community.
Unity from east side of motherfucking LA, Crips, Bloods, Power Rules. This shit is special, man. We put this shit together just for y'all. I'm talking about at rehearsals. Niggas is showing love and respecting each other.
Around the same time Beyonce dropped Cowboy Carter, the great beef of 2024 was just starting to pop off. The week before Cowboy Carter was dropped, Kendrick was featured on Future and Metro Boomin's Like That, which again kickstarted this journey to pulling off the blanket of The Wiz, aka Drake. Now, although I could talk about this moment for days, I do have a whole playlist breaking down how we even got to that point, so definitely go check that out if you want to relive the glory days. Now, although Drake and J. Cole were specifically called out in the Like That verse, Drake specifically represented the industry as a whole. He was kind of the face of the industry, and that's what Kendrick was talking to. Although he was specifically calling out Drake, he was more broadly addressing the industry. And the industry had been pushing Drake to kind of be the face of hip hop, whether it was by putting him on every playlist on Spotify or behind the scenes kind of pushing him to drop more misogynistic music, more music that he's talking about like street stuff. And we know Drake has never been street, and his career was started and got this big by catering to the female audience, and specifically the Black female audience, which he quickly turned against. So Kendrick's mission going into this was to kind of neutralize Drake and the industry's power, call out the predatory behaviors that were going on, and kind of bring back integrity within the genre, get us back to the roots of hip hop and kind of why it all started in the first place. We got so many iconic moments from this, but Kendrick dropping Not Like Us essentially neutralizes that power and kind of gets us to open our eyes a little bit more. And in that song alone, he gives us a history lesson on how colonization has not gone away. It's just the way that they enact those powers, the way that they colonize is a little bit different. And it's the same way that American Requiem and Yaya kind of point that out as well. So, although, yes, Not Like Us was a hit, and we already know what that led to. We get so much more just from like the essence of that track. Like that track means so much more than what it ended up being. We see that, initially Kendrick came into this battle out of love for the game, love for the sport of hip hop and battle rap, love for the culture and what hip hop has provided for his community, himself, all of us as a community. And so, he starts it off a little bit more competitive, but it was as if Drake didn't understand, of course, because he's not like us, that this is battle rap, this is a sport. Hip hop has always been competitive in nature. And he took it too far. He went straight to calling out and mentioning Kendrick's family. So of course Kendrick's gonna take it to hell. Like, all right, I tried to come out of this for love, even for Drake. He even says like, I don't even. Well, at first he said, "I don't hate you." I think that he was able to kind of see, why Drake was acting the way that he was acting and where he had come from. And maybe he had hope that Drake would be able to change, some of his behaviors and kind of wake up and take a step back and look at himself. And that's not what happened. So Kendrick had to pull out the crazy boogeyman side of him. But during all of this, Kendrick puts on the Pop Out show, which featured a bunch of up and coming rappers in LA, male and female, some OGs in the culture, and most importantly, he brought together multiple different gangs that were, initially started from this American game. He brought them together who had years and years of feuds. And, Black and Hispanic communities, kind of the gang violence in those communities amped up around the crack era and the Reagan era, which Kendrick talks about a lot in his music. And him kind of bringing together all of these different gangs plants the seed into the community, into the culture of what it can look like when we come together out of love and when we come together as a community. The oppressors want us to fight each other because when we're focused on each other, when we're fighting each other, we don't really have the energy to worry about what they're doing on the outside and how they are manufacturing all of this so that we can stay oppressed. When we come together as a community, when we take a look around and say, why are we fighting each other? When we should be putting that energy towards the people who are oppressing us, towards the people who are putting us in these situations, in these conditions that then cause us to defend ourselves or whatever it is that we need to do. It's not us as a community, it's not each other, it's them over there. And I don't want to push this us versus them type of mentality, but being able to see that really does plant the seed in your head of wow, we can come together as a community and we are stronger through love and support. But he's also able to plant a seed and kind of open our eyes, like I said before, to the ways that we were losing the true core and roots of hip hop, of the genre, and what it truly means to be an outsider of the genre. I think after that verse, there was so much conversation about where hip hop was at the time and the trajectory of it. And I think him and the aftermath of the beef kind of sparked a lot more artists, to hip hop artists in specific, to go back to its roots, to pull from those soul samples, to get into the competitive, battle rap type of nature. There's so much more to hip hop as a culture than just even rapping. You have the history behind DJing and the importance of DJs in hip hop, the importance of breakdancing and graffiti art, and all of that within hip hop. And on top of that, we were able to also learn so much. So Kendrick and Beyonce kind of simultaneously putting together, dropping these very intentional projects has helped to show us, how we can, one, come together as a community, educate our community. And in the next video, I will go through how the performances that both Kendrick and Beyonce did at the halftime shows of the Christmas game and Super Bowl show us what that love looks like and gives us a visualization of building a new America.